I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would find herself in this situation. The kind of woman who would lie awake at night, replaying moments in her head that she should be ashamed of, moments that should never have happened. But life has a way of surprising you, of leading you down paths you never thought you'd walk. My name is Melissa, and this is my story, one I've never shared with anyone until now. The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. Just another face at the gym, another person focused on their own journey. I had started going to the gym 3 months ago, a desperate attempt to reclaim some part of myself that I felt I had lost over the years. Marriage, career, the daily grind of life, they had all slowly chipped away at the woman I used to be. I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror anymore. So when David suggested I do something for myself, I chose the gym. A place where I could focus just on me, even if only for an hour each day. That day was different though. As I struggled with the weights, unsure if I was even doing the exercise correctly, I felt someone watching me. When I looked up, I saw him, tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Your form needs some adjustment," he said, his voice deep and calm. "May I?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He moved closer, his hand gently touching my elbow, guiding my arm into the correct position. It was a professional touch, nothing inappropriate about it, and yet I felt a shiver run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "I'm Jack," he said with a smile, "one of the trainers here." "Melissa," I replied, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "That was 6 weeks ago, and since then, everything has changed. But let me back up. I need to tell you about David, about our life together, about how I ended up in a place where a simple touch from another man could make my heart race in a way it hadn't in years. David and I have been married for 8 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and married young. He was everything I had ever wanted: kind, intelligent, ambitious. We had plans, so many plans. We would build our careers, travel the world, maybe have children eventually. But life rarely follows the plans we make for it. David's company took off in ways we never expected. Suddenly, he was working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. Business trips became more frequent, sometimes lasting weeks at a time. I was proud of him, proud of his success. But as the years passed, I found myself increasingly alone. Our home, once filled with laughter and conversation, grew quiet. Our interactions became brief exchanges about schedules and household matters. "I miss you," I said to him one night after he had been home for less than 24 hours before preparing to leave again. He looked up from his laptop, his eyes tired but kind. "I miss you too, Mel, but this deal could mean everything for us. Just a little longer, okay?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was always just a little longer. And I understood, I really did. But understanding didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. That was when I decided to join the gym. I needed something to fill my days, something that was just for me, and for a while it helped. The physical exertion, the endorphins, the sense of accomplishment, they all gave me a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just waiting for David to call. And then I met Jack. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, a gradual shift that I didn't even notice at first. He was my trainer, nothing more. He would correct my form, encourage me when I wanted to give up, push me to try just one more rep. He was good at his job, attentive and professional. But then I started noticing things. The way his eyes would linger on mine a second too long, the way he always seemed to be available when I came in for my sessions, the way he remembered little things I had mentioned in passing. "You said you had that presentation today," he mentioned one evening as I was finishing my workout. "How did it go?" I was surprised he remembered. David had forgotten all about it, even though I had been nervous for weeks. "It went well," I said, unable to hide my smile. "Really well, actually." "I knew it would," he said, and the confidence in his voice made something warm bloom in my chest. That was the first time I realized that Jack saw me in a way that David hadn't in a long time. He saw me as a person, not just as a wife, not just as a part of his life that was always there, reliable and unchanging. He saw my struggles, my triumphs, my growth, and it felt good to be seen. I started looking forward to my sessions with Jack more than I should have. I found myself putting more effort into my appearance before heading to the gym, something I justified as simply wanting to feel good about myself. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. One day, after a particularly challenging session, Jack suggested we cool down with a walk around the park adjacent to the gym. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said as we walked side by side. "It's good to be dedicated, but you need to give yourself grace too." I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Grace isn't really my strong suit." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Why are you so hard on yourself, Melissa? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in a long time. David was so wrapped up in his own world that our conversations rarely delved into anything deeper than surface-level exchanges. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I'm just used to it. Jack's gaze was intense, searching. You deserve better than that. Something in his words, in the way he said them, made my heart race. We were standing too close, close enough that I could smell his cologne, a subtle, woody scent that made me think of autumn nights and crackling fires. I should go, I said, taking a step back. David will be wondering where I am. Jack nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a flash of disappointment perhaps. Of course. I walked away that day with my mind in turmoil. What was I doing? I was a married woman. I had no business feeling this way about another man. And yet, as I drove home, all I could think about was the way Jack had looked at me, the way he had seen the parts of me that I thought had disappeared long ago. At home, David was on another conference call. He waved at me as I entered, mouthing almost done before turning his attention back to his laptop. I stood there for a moment, watching him, feeling a strange mix of love and longing. I loved this man, had loved him for nearly a decade. But when was the last time he had really looked at me? Really asked me how I was doing, not just out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to know. The days that followed were a blur of routine. David was busy with a new project, coming home late and leaving early. I continued my sessions with Jack, but something had shifted between us. There was a tension now, an unspoken awareness that hovered in the air whenever we were together. I tried to maintain a professional distance, to remind myself of the vows I had made, the life I had built with David. But it was becoming increasingly difficult, especially as Jack seemed to understand me in ways that David no longer did. One evening, as I was finishing my workout, Jack approached me with a bottle of water. You seem tense today, he observed. Everything okay? I took the water gratefully, avoiding his gaze. Just work stuff. He nodded, not pushing further. That was another thing about Jack. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply offered and left the choice to me. Do you want to talk about it? He asked after a moment. I hesitated. The truth was, I did want to talk about it. I wanted to tell someone about the promotion I'd been passed over for, about how David had been too busy to even acknowledge my disappointment, about how I was starting to feel like my life was slipping through my fingers. It's nothing, I said instead, just a bad day. Jack studied me for a moment, then nodded. Well, if you ever do want to talk, I'm a pretty good listener. I smiled despite myself. I'll keep that in mind. As I gathered my things to leave, Jack called out to me. Hey, Melissa, I turned back. Yeah. For what it's worth, he said, his voice soft. Any company would be lucky to have you. I felt a lump form in my throat. How did he always know exactly what to say? Thank you, I managed, before hurrying out the door. That night, as David worked late again, I found myself thinking about Jack. About his kindness, his attention, the way he made me feel valued. It was dangerous territory, I knew that. But the loneliness was becoming increasingly hard to bear, and Jack's warmth was like a beacon in the darkness. The weeks passed, and my friendship with Jack deepened. We started having coffee after my sessions, sitting in the small cafe adjacent to the gym, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his life, his dreams, his fears. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone in a long time, sharing parts of myself that I had kept hidden even from David. I told myself it was innocent, just friendship. But the butterflies in my stomach whenever I saw him, the way my heart raced when he smiled at me, the way I found myself thinking about him even when we were apart, all of these betrayed the truth I was trying to deny. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday evening. David had called to tell me he would be staying in the city overnight, some last-minute meeting he couldn't miss. I tried not to let the disappointment show in my voice. After all, this was nothing new. I went to the gym earlier than usual, hoping the physical exertion would help clear my mind. Jack was there, as he always seemed to be when I needed him most. You're here early, he commented, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I needed to get out of the house, I admitted. He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Well, let's make the most of it. The workout was intense, both of us pushing harder than usual. There was a different energy between us that day, a charge in the air that made every interaction, every glance feel heightened. Afterwards, as I was catching my breath, Jack approached me with a towel. You did great today, he said, his voice warm with approval. I took the towel, our fingers brushing. That simple touch sent a jolt through me, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Thanks, I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, the gym around us fading into the background. There was something in his eyes, a question, a longing that mirrored my own. Melissa, he started, but I cut him off. I should go, I said, suddenly afraid of what might happen if I stayed. He nodded, but as I turned to leave, he reached out, his hand gently catching my wrist. Have dinner with me tonight. It wasn't a command, but a question, a door opening before me. I knew what my answer should be. I was married. I had made vows. But in that moment, with Jack's eyes on mine, with the warmth of his hand on my skin, with the loneliness of my empty home waiting for me, I couldn't bring myself to say no. Okay, I whispered. The restaurant he chose was small and intimate, tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. As we sat across from each other, the candlelight casting a warm glow on his face, I felt a sense of both exhilaration and dread. What was I doing here? What would happen after tonight? But as the evening progressed, as the wine flowed and the conversation deepened, I found myself caring less and less about those questions. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive, seen, valued. Jack asked me about my hopes, my dreams, the things that brought me joy. He listened when I spoke, really listened, his eyes never leaving mine. Why me? I asked suddenly, the question escaping before I could stop it. He looked surprised. What do you mean? I gestured vaguely. Of all the women who come to the gym, why spend time with me? I'm not special, I'm not. You are, he interrupted, his voice firm. You are special, Melissa, and the fact that you don't see it only makes you more so. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a tightness in my throat that made it hard to speak. How long had it been since someone had made me feel this way? How long had it been since I had felt worthy of such attention? As we left the restaurant, the night air cool against my skin, Jack took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like crossing a threshold, like stepping from one life into another. I don't want to go home, I admitted, the words a whisper in the darkness. Jack's eyes searched mine, understanding and desire mingling in their depths. Then don't. His apartment was close by, a small but tasteful space that somehow felt exactly like him. As he closed the door behind us, the reality of what I was doing hit me with full force. I was here, in another man's apartment, while my husband thought I was home waiting for him. Melissa, Jack said softly, sensing my hesitation, we don't have to do anything, we can just talk if that's what you want. I looked at him, at this man who had awakened something in me that I thought had died long ago. What if I want more than that? The words hung in the air between us, a confession, a question, a plea. Jack moved closer, his hand gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from my face. Then we'll take it as slow as you need. His kiss was everything I had imagined it would be and nothing like I had expected. Soft at first, tentative, but deepening as my response encouraged him. His hands were gentle as they cupped my face, as if I were something precious, something to be cherished. As we moved deeper into his apartment, as the night closed in around us, I knew I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But in that moment, with Jack's arms around me, with his whispers in my ear, I couldn't bring myself to care. The morning light was harsh, unforgiving as it streamed through the unfamiliar curtains. I lay still for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts to make sense of what had happened. Jack was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. I watched him for a moment, this man who had shown me a side of myself I had forgotten existed. But in the clarity of the morning, the weight of what I had done pressed down on me. I had cheated on my husband. The words felt foreign, impossible. I wasn't this person. I didn't do things like this. I slipped out of bed quietly, gathering my things, trying not to wake Jack. But as I was about to leave, I felt a hand on my arm. You're leaving, he said, his voice still thick with sleep. I couldn't turn to face him. I have to go home. There was a pause, a silence heavy with unspoken words. Will I see you again? The question made my heart ache. Because the truth was, I wanted to see him again. Despite the guilt, despite the knowledge that what I had done was wrong, the thought of never being with Jack again was almost unbearable. I don't know, I answered honestly. He didn't try to stop me as I left, didn't make promises or demands, and somehow that made it harder. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. Guilt, yes, but also a strange sense of awakening, as if I had been sleepwalking through my life and had suddenly been jolted awake. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw David's car. He was home, earlier than expected. My heart pounded in my chest as I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to erase any signs of what I had done. But how do you hide a secret like this? David was in the kitchen when I entered, making coffee. He looked up with a smile. Morning, he said, as if it were any other day. I managed to wrap things up early. I forced a smile, guilt churning in my stomach. That's great. He studied me for a moment, and I feared he could see right through me, could see the betrayal written on my skin. You look different. My heart skipped a beat. Different how? He shrugged. I don't know, just different, good different. I didn't know what to say to that. How could I explain the change he saw in me? How could I tell him that another man had made me feel alive in ways he hadn't in years? The days that followed were a strange dance of guilt and longing. I avoided the gym, unable to face Jack, unable to trust myself around him. David, ironically, was more present than he had been in months, making an effort to come home earlier to engage in conversations that went beyond the superficial. It should have made me happy, this renewed attention from my husband, and part of me was happy. But another part, a part I was afraid to acknowledge, missed Jack, missed the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. A week after that night, I received a text from Jack, "I miss you. No pressure, just wanted you to know." I stared at the words for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete button. I should erase it, block his number, cut all ties. That would be the right thing to do, the responsible thing. But instead, I found myself typing a response, "I miss you too." It was a small admission, but it felt monumental. It was an acknowledgement that what had happened between us wasn't just a mistake, a moment of weakness. It was something more, something that had taken root in my heart. The next day, as I was leaving work, I saw him waiting for me in the parking lot. My heart skipped a beat at the sight of him, leaning against his car, his eyes finding mine across the distance. I approached him slowly, uncertain, aware of the eyes of my colleagues who might see us. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low. "I needed to see you," he replied simply. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, looking around nervously. "Not here," he nodded, understanding. "I'll follow you." I led him to a small park a few blocks away, a quiet place where we were unlikely to be seen by anyone who knew me. As we sat on a bench, the autumn leaves falling around us, I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, guilt, but also a deep, undeniable longing. "I can't stop thinking about you," Jack said, his voice breaking the silence between us. "I've tried, Melissa. I know your situation, I know you're married, but what happened between us? It wasn't nothing." I looked down at my hands at the wedding ring that suddenly felt heavy on my finger. "I know. Tell me you regret it," he said, "and I'll walk away right now. I'll never contact you again." I knew what I should say. I should tell him that yes, I regretted it, that it was a mistake, that I loved my husband and wanted to make my marriage work. But the words wouldn't come. "I can't," I whispered, finally looking up at him. "I can't say that." The relief in his eyes was palpable. He reached for my hand and I let him take it, our fingers intertwining. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling lost, adrift in unfamiliar waters. He squeezed my hand gently. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." That conversation marked the beginning of something I never thought I would be a part of, an affair. The word itself felt dirty, wrong. But what I felt for Jack didn't feel wrong. It felt like rediscovering a part of myself that I had lost, like finally breathing after being underwater for too long. We were careful, meeting in places where we were unlikely to be seen, using excuses that wouldn't raise suspicion. I told David I had joined a book club, that I was taking a cooking class, that I was working late. The lies came easier than I ever thought they would, each one a stone laid on the path further away from the life I had known. And David, in a cruel twist of irony, seemed more attentive than ever. He made efforts to be home more, suggested date nights, asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. It should have made me happy, should have made me reconsider what I was doing, but it only made me realize that his renewed attention came too late. The damage had been done and my heart was already elsewhere. Jack was everything that David wasn't. He was present, attentive, passionate. He looked at me as if I were the most fascinating person he had ever met, listened to me as if my words were precious. In his arms, I felt young again, vibrant, alive. The guilt was there, always there, a shadow that followed me everywhere. But in the moments when Jack and I were together, that shadow receded, pushed back by the light of what we shared. But affairs, like all secrets, have a way of coming to light, and ours was no exception. It was a small mistake, a slip that I should have been more careful to avoid. A receipt from a restaurant where Jack and I had dined, left in the pocket of a coat I rarely wore. David found it while looking for something else, a mundane moment that shattered the facade I had built. "When did you go here?" he asked, holding up the piece of paper, his face curious rather than suspicious. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "This restaurant," he said, showing me the receipt. "I didn't know you'd been there." My mind raced, searching for an explanation that would make sense. "Oh, it was with the book club," he frowned slightly. "The book club goes to dinner." "Sometimes," I said, the lie feeling clumsy on my tongue. "After we discuss the book." He seemed to accept this, putting the receipt down and continuing his search for whatever he had been looking for. But something in his demeanor had shifted, a suspicion planted that would grow in the days to come. David started asking more questions, subtle at first but increasingly direct. Where had I been? Who had I been with? Why was I coming home later than I used to? Each question felt like a trap, each answer another lie piled on top of the ones before. And then one evening, as I was getting ready to leave for what I had told him was a book club meeting, he confronted me directly. "There is no book club, is there?" he said, his voice quiet but firm. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. "What?" "I called the library," he said. "They don't have a book club on Thursday evenings. They never have." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. "David, I can explain." "Who is he?" he interrupted, his voice breaking on the question. I turned to face him, seeing the pain in his eyes, the betrayal that I had put there. In that moment, all the excuses I had made to myself, all the justifications for what I had done, crumbled away, leaving only the cold, hard truth. "His name is Jack," I said, the words barely audible. "He's a trainer at the gym." David closed his eyes as if the confirmation was a physical blow. "How long?" 2 months, I admitted. He nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard. Did I love Jack? I had been so caught up in the thrill of it all, the excitement, the passion, that I hadn't stopped to consider whether what I felt was love. "I don't know," I answered honestly. David looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness that broke my heart. "Do you still love me?" And there it was, the question at the heart of everything. Did I still love the man I had married, the man I had built a life with, despite everything, despite the loneliness and the distance and the choices I had made? "Yes," I whispered, and it was true. "But something's been broken between us for a long time, David, and I didn't know how to fix it." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "So your solution was to cheat, to lie to me every day?" "No," I said, tears beginning to form. "That wasn't a solution. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I felt so alone, David. For years, I felt like I was living in this house by myself. You were always working, always distracted. And when Jack came along and actually saw me, actually listened to me, I was weak. I'm so sorry." David was quiet for a long time, processing my words. Then, without another word, he walked past me and out the door, leaving me standing there, my world collapsing around me. I didn't go to Jack that night. Instead, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of the life I had built and now destroyed. I thought about calling him, telling him what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Did I want to leave my marriage, start over with Jack? Or did I want to try to rebuild what David and I had once had? David didn't come home that night or the next. When he finally returned, 3 days later, he looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed, his shoulders hunched with the weight of everything that had happened. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "About us, about what happened." I nodded, afraid to speak, afraid of what he might say. "I'm angry," he continued. "I'm hurt, but I also know that I haven't been the husband you deserved. I've been so caught up in work, in building a future, that I forgot to live in the present with you." Tears filled my eyes at his words, at the acknowledgement of what I had felt for so long. "That doesn't excuse what you did," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Nothing excuses betrayal, but I understand at least a little why you might have been vulnerable to it." "I'm so sorry, David," I said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. He nodded, accepting my apology for what it was. "I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if I can trust you again, but I think we owe it to ourselves, to what we once had, to try." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, a possibility that I had not dared to hope for. "What about," he hesitated, "what about him?" I knew what he was asking. If we were going to try to rebuild our marriage, Jack couldn't be a part of my life anymore. "It's over," I said, and even as I spoke the words, I felt a pang of loss. "I'll end it, today." David nodded, relief visible in his eyes. "Thank you." Ending things with Jack was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I met him in the park where we had decided to continue our relationship, the place where, in many ways, our affair had truly begun. He knew as soon as he saw me. He found out. I nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Yes." Jack sat down heavily on the bench, his face a mask of emotions. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" I shook my head, touched by his concern even now. "No, nothing like that. He's angry, hurt, but he wants to try to work things out." Jack was silent for a moment, absorbing my words. "And what do you want?" It was the question I had been asking myself since David had confronted me. What did I want? The safe, familiar harbor of my marriage, with all its history and shared memories? Or the uncertain waters of a new relationship built on the unstable foundation of an affair? There were setbacks, of course. Moments when the trust between us felt too broken to repair, when the hurt resurfaced and threatened to drown us. But we kept trying, kept fighting for what we had once had, for what we could have again. One evening, about 6 months after everything had come to light, David and I were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset. It was a simple moment, the kind of ordinary beauty that we had once taken for granted. "I love you," David said, his hand finding mine. "I never stopped, even when." "I know," I said, squeezing his hand. "I love you too," and I did. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the pain, I loved this man beside me, this life we had built together. Jack had awakened something in me that had been dormant, had reminded me of my worth, my value. But David was my partner, my history, my future. I still think about Jack sometimes, wonder what might have been if things had been different. But I don't regret my choice to stay, to fight for my marriage. Because in the end, love isn't just about passion or excitement, it's about commitment, about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would betray her husband, who would lie and deceive. But I've learned that we are all capable of mistakes, of weakness, and more importantly, I've learned that mistakes don't define us. It's what we do afterwards that matters. David and I are still rebuilding, still healing. Some days are harder than others, but we're doing it together one day at a time, and for now, that's enough.